Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to Finding and Selecting the Right Software for Your Business. I'm Hayden McCall, and I will be moderating today's session. I'm top of the list. If you've got the videos down the side, the panelists are here as well. We've got Rob Mackay, Joanne Hand, Hamish Bowen, and Ross Gilchrist. We won't go through individual introductions. I'm sure you'll get to know them as we go through the session. We've got a series of questions that we presented to each of the panelists to lead off with their response, and then we'll open to the panel for wider discussion on the basis of what they've got to say. A little bit of housekeeping. There's still people arriving as we go, but we will be recording today's session, obviously, but based on the bumbling around that started just there. That'll get sent out to you as a link tomorrow. And please encourage you all to raise questions as we go in the context of each of the questions that we've got. And as the panelists are talking, fire away in the little Q&A pane. Just open that up and type away. I'll get those through onto my pane. I've got it down the side here, and we'll be able to pose those either while that speaker is talking, or we've got time allocated at the end to wrap those up. All right, so without further ado, I will hand over to Rob Mackay from Pitcher Partners and pose him the question. A lot of new software decisions seem to be prompted by growth, but what are the other factors that might drive a decision to upgrade or create a get a new software environment set up, Rob?
Thanks, Hayden. Growth is certainly a major factor, but some of the other things that we see that sort of that probably the growth drives and some of those other factors are the shortcomings around reporting. The use of a lot of Excel reporting, problems with manual processes, and what we call human middleware. The labour to run the system that the organisation's using becomes a real, it becomes a burden. So they're all things that you will see, sort of what we'd call telltale signs in a business that it's probably outgrowing the solution they're currently using. Some of the other factors outside of that, new market entrants, industry changes. We found, for instance, in the health and care sector here in Australia, the NDIS has made some major changes to the business model for a lot of organisations, and their systems just weren't going to cope with the demands of that. So it's pushed people to look for new systems.
All software vendors like a mandatory compliance regime amongst their prospect base, don't you? Okay, so good bunch of ideas there. Panel, I guess I'll just open it up to any that have got comments specifically, maybe anecdotes of scenarios you've seen in dealing with prospects and businesses out there.
I think, Hayden, if I may, I would agree with Rob that by and large, we end up seeing people that are sort of swimming in spreadsheets because the systems really just can't cope with an end-to-end platform. So we come across a lot of growing businesses that simply just look up in spreadsheets to try and cope with that extra business process or extra load, and then as Rob mentions, it becomes a very intensive process.
Any other comments, guys? I guess that dovetails reasonably nicely into the 3 KPIs. The next question, we're posing it to Hamish, so why don't we cut to that? I'm sure there'll be a theme here also. But the 3 KPIs when you're starting to suffer and you're knowing that your software is inadequate in terms of the job you're asking it to do. Hamish, maybe to lead off with what your top 3 were. I think it's a big long list here.
Yeah, that's right. I suppose I was thinking about it for when you put in the software, when it's inadequate. From a project support and perspective, you always sort of see, the problem logs and the time to resolution and availability of the things that kind of pop up from a support perspective straight away. But interesting, I was just thinking about on the business side, you kind of notice a couple of examples I can think of. There was one, it's an insurance broker. Their billing receivable cycle was pretty inadequate, and you just saw massive blowouts in drop in their revenue, debtor days blow out, cash flow dries up because they can't process it quick enough and get it out there fast enough. The other one was an import distribution company that kind of had inadequate inventory management software. And again, you just sort of notice the blowout in sort of turnover, stock hold, stock adjustments, everything else, because it's sort of inadequate in terms of the way it's receiving and managing inventory. I probably could bring every KPI on the operational landscape if I thought about the processes that software support, but generally you do notice deterioration pretty quickly and it's not well supported by the systems.
Yeah, and I guess it's going to be specific to industries and specific businesses, and certainly supply chain businesses. A whole bunch of kind of KPI rule books, I suppose, that that you would look at to say things are out of whack and something needs to be addressed. I guess one of the things that I thought might come out within this is changing business models, and that the whole digital transformation theme that we're seeing in a lot of businesses wanting to go more digital with their transactions. Is that something you guys are seeing in the marketplace as a driver, and looking to software solutions to provide that? Joe, have you got a comment there?
I think more than one of the drivers I'm seeing more is when it comes to the hardware changes, and the businesses are taking that point as a reason to look at their internal software and how it's managing. So the talk of cloud is more predominant than the digital transformation. There's still a little clarification to come in on the digital transformation, I believe. It's the IT change. Let's move to the cloud.
Yeah, I'm seeing a little bit of it around process automation in some of the back office functions. Sort of this number of clients that have sort of talked about trying to automate as much as they can things like the accounts payable process, some of those matching tasks, that they're looking for technology to really streamline that, integrate better into sort of their banking systems.
Yeah, it's interesting always hearing people who, like yourselves, that are at the coalface relative to, I hear all the noise and the iStart sort of news stream of, I guess it's the Gartner buzz phrases, and it always is so far ahead of where the business is actually at in terms of what they're ready and prepared to invest in. So it's interesting hearing those perspectives.
Probably the other one, Hayden, that I see is at the front end, at the e-commerce side. I think people are looking for more and more integration into a website where the client might be sort of self-serving more and more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if there's no greater message in terms of drivers, the arrival of Amazon and the noise around Alibaba and obviously expectations among a user base in terms of being able to engage digitally really has to be motivating a lot of people.
Yep.
All right, let's move on. I know we're going to be crossing things fairly quickly here, but we've got quite a bit to cover and all good, interesting stuff to see wider conversations. So moving on to getting into looking at the type of software that's going to solve the solutions, and pose this one to Ross, and looking at simplicity. Everyone drives to simplicity. Simplicity is a fantastic thing to achieve in terms of rolling software out to a user community. They look at it, they love it, they like using it, and they accept it and embrace it. But that functionality might run out quite quickly, and it may not be deliver the competitive advantage that you might be looking for. So I guess the question is, how do you balance those two ends of the spectrum with decisions you make?
Yeah, thanks, Aidan. It's an interesting one. I mean, at a high level, I don't actually believe it's the case in terms of, I guess, modern ERP or business management platforms in terms of ease of use and depth of functionality. I think both can be achieved. I mean, obviously, there's a learning curve for the user moving into a more comprehensive platform and a bit more structure on business processes than, say, a base solution with the spreadsheets that we mentioned. But I think in our experience, once we really get the users into the system and get them understanding the capabilities, they pretty quickly realize how more efficiently they can work and don't have to use Excel so much, or multiple clicks to try and find something, or even having to email another team to find out information, sales to operations, vice versa, because we're in one platform, and we see that them quickly embracing the platforms. That's not to say that there's not certain processes that could in fact take slightly longer and be, if we can class it, less simple in a best practice system for good reason. But typically once the user gets on board, they see that there's so many other areas that are helping them in the overall context of that. I think it's a balance, and from our side, that's why it's really important to get users on board early in the process and getting them engaged, get that buy-in. So that's where we see that transition to try and get that simple usability while still providing the deep functionality that management and the organization needs.
Yeah. Any other comments, panel?
Yeah, I suppose I'd just add to that. I'd sort of say that probably simplicity it's intuitive, right? That you're finding the software has got better at being intuitive, and you can understand and navigate your way around it. And like you say, you're seeing better adoption quicker because it's better designed. I think people are taking, the bad old days of things that were badly designed, and you had to do lots of training to understand how the software worked. Nowadays, you're sort of seeing it in a lot more seamless process.
Yeah, I'd agree, Hamish. I think most of the sort of current products are far better, or create a far better customer experience or user experience.
Well, that's good. The software industry's achieved something. We'll take that as a win. Okay, and this one, I guess, plugs in similarly, and probably skewed a little bit towards the ERP end of the spectrum. But Joe, do you want to comment on this, with financials being embedded in your operational transactional data and having visibility of, I guess, rather than finance having all the financial information and operations having the operational, that you see the crossover of the two and the benefits that delivers to a business?
Absolutely. For me, there's just the single source of data is this key, and taking that a step further, having it in real time. I mean, batch updates, you've got to watch that. They can cause issues down the track. So getting real-time single source data to drill down on is essential. Decision makers now are wanting an up-to-date view. They want to know where their sales are at. They want to know stock. They want to know cash. They want to know debtors, and they want to be able to drill down. And even more, what's driving things now is the ability to run the business on the go, to have mobility of all that information. A dashboard is key to them across the screen now, not reports or drilling down through various screens. Give me the dashboard. And it gives businesses that take that move and move there to be on that single source in real time, it gives them an edge over on competition. They can make the decisions quicker. They can do away with the costly and risky integration scenarios, the endless reconciliations that have to be. They can put people into different roles, and to do away with the double entry, which is very time consuming and inefficient. And then we've got the risk of inaccuracies going through the system. It was put into this operational side, it wasn't carried through to the other side correctly. Now we've got to do a reconciliation. So that slows it all down for the business owner who wants to know where he stands at any one point in time.
Okay, yeah, it's not something we've touched on, but you've just mentioned it there, and it probably is something that's relevant. And I guess we're talking here, do you decide to go big bang, full, multifaceted ERP solution that tends with come with a few zeros on the end of it, versus the nice little, software as a service, cloud-based solution that can jump on and be self-provisioned that afternoon. But then immediately you've got a different silo of data, and you've got this integration challenge. Where you might get a benefit of quick implementation, cheap solution, lovely user experience, but you've got an organisation that's a little bit now compartmentalised, and finding the balance way through that. Is this a scale thing? Is it simply smaller businesses look for the cloud solutions, larger businesses go for the ERP, or are we talking something different here with these more modern ERP solutions?
I think that you touched on it when you said a quick benefit. Yes, they all sound very good, but unless you've drilled down on your business needs, and which I know we're going to cover a little bit later in some of our discussion, but unless you've drilled down on where you're going to, what your strategic focus is, what your needs are, it's a quick win. So subscribe to it tomorrow, go online, do it, but why waste the time doing that? Spend the time up front looking at what the real need is of your business.
Hamish, any comment there?
Yeah, I guess I'd agree. I was just sort of thinking about the one example of the sort of operational data. We had a company that was kind of measuring their success by the throughput of sales, but they weren't considering the margin and how much money they're actually making out of it. And it was kind of once they put in the ERP and could kind of measure both elements, that he sort of got more meaningful commentary on what they were doing as a business, right? And sort of was, you know, yeah, I sold 50 widgets, but if you're only making $1 on each widget, then maybe you'll sell the widget that makes you a couple of thousand.
Yeah, so that profitability analysis, job costing, and having that information at the fingertips of people who are making the sales decisions and setting pricing and so on.
And I think these are probably just adding on to the point about the cloud. You know, it's there's always a bit of misnomer that it's an easy exercise just to subscribe, and you kind of, you know, you've got a full functioning ERP, right? It's you got no, it's as big a disruption to your business as anything, right? So.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on from that. Another one back to Rob. The best steps to arrive at a shortlist, and you know, the process of early evaluation. You're sort of framing up what the organisation needs. You've got to define what your requirements are, what your pain points are. How do you short-circuit that shortlisting process, and what are the common mistakes you see that companies make?
Well, I guess ultimately, organisations need to try and do as much due diligence as necessary, given the sort of investment they're making. I mean, the traditional approach to document a group of requirements and then send that out to the vendors is probably, we're finding organisations are looking for different ways to go about that, because that can be fairly time consuming. You know, some of the things that we've found that works more effectively is really focusing on what the unique differences of that business are, compare, you know, what the components or functionality that might not be standard in an ERP package, and focus on that and really drill down into it. You know, we're using process flows as opposed to requirements sometimes. I think scripting and getting really strong scenarios for demos is another approach. And we've had clients that really just want to move through a proof of concept. So they've all got their pros and cons, but we certainly are finding we need to be much more flexible and creative around the procurement process that we support with a client. You know, the traditional approach that, you know, we would have used a couple of years ago is not the way we do all of our procurements now. And it really is about sitting down and understanding what the business is trying to achieve, and then how do we meet those requirements. Certainly the mistakes, though, are, you know, where people sort of have that vendor or product bias, or it's all about the relationship they develop with the vendor. You know, they've got to still go through the appropriate due diligence, and it's just a matter of finding the right way for the client to do that.
So when you mention the traditional approach that you'd take, I guess that's talking about, you know, putting together your RFP document, putting that out to the market, awaiting responses, and selecting the winner from the pack. Is that what you're saying? But now it's kind of like focus that really into the complexity, the high value requirements, the ones that are going to deliver the greatest benefits. Yeah,
correct. Or even with some clients, what they're wanting to do is skip that detailed requirement stage and build up some scenarios that they present. You know, give a broad understanding to the vendor of what their business does, but then build up some scenarios and then ask the vendor to come in and do a proof of concept or demonstrate how they would deliver that functionality.
Okay. Yeah. So agility with the whole thing, and I guess quick run to return.
Yep. And in some ways, maybe, you know, when I reflect, that the whole cloud model perhaps allows or enables some of that as well. You know, some of these solutions can be then configured for a scenario fairly quickly, and so that some of the vendors are quite receptive to that.
Okay, I see a little bit of dialogue going along with questions, and it's relevant here, just with integrated financials and operations. Right, dating back to the last question, just from Andrew, thank you. Just where it resides in terms of the responsibility of the quality of data, I guess, and governance for what's going on in terms of the use of the system. Where does that reside? Hamish, you've come in with that it sits with the business unit. So maybe just expand on that.
Yeah, I just sort of think they're the ones owning and managing the business, so they're better to own the numbers that come out of it as well. That was perspective. You know, accountant may not agree with it. Maybe the owners of the numbers.
Yeah, it's funny. The accountants tend to, I guess, have a wider remit, but I agree with you. I think absolutely that business units and the hands-on people are the ones that are doing the task at the coalface. So they're the ones that need to change their practices. So ultimately, they should have ownership and measurement of how well they're doing that.
Sometimes that's a maturity thing in some of these businesses or the business units around understanding some of those key principles of what ERP is all about, that your operational transactions generate the financial transaction ultimately, and understanding that connection. Okay, let's press on. Next one on the list is talking about team structure and establishing a team to do all of these good things of setting the project off in the right direction. Jo, do you want to talk to that a little bit?
Yes, thanks, Hayden. For me, the owner has to take the lead. The owners, it might be a board, it might be just not one owner. They've got to present their strategic view to their business and then explain that across so that they can get a buy-in from the business to take then that view and the budget that they have for it out to market. The next key, of course, is the key business process owners. It's not just a finance or IT. I thought we got past the days of it just being finance or IT, but no, this still comes up quite regularly that just one finance person is dealing with an implementation, or the IT manager is. It is more than that, and it needs to get the key business process owners together. Someone's then got to come in and combine that, the owner's strategic view and the project sponsor that he is or she is, and glue the team together. Now that doesn't always happen internally because people are busy and their time has got to be allowed. So sometimes it needs an external party to be brought into a system to go through that. Or maybe it's brought in the form of backfilling the key players so that they can concentrate, because it's not write down what I want, hand it over and give me a new system. They've got to treat it as a full-time role going forward so they end up with what they're looking for. So you have with the delivery from the partners who are delivering the implementation, they've got full-time people on it. They need the same time commitment from the customers. So if you like, that's my high-level view of what the best team structure needs to be.
Ross, you've probably got a perspective on this as well, with the engagements that you look at and how you sort of come into companies and looking at how well they've set themselves up to be speaking with a vendor. What's your perspective?
I think by and large I would be following what Joanne was really saying there in terms of structural approach, and pretty much you have to have the driver from the front, if you like, in terms of or key stakeholders in the business that are going to drive that. So yeah, pretty much what Joanne was advising upon there.
Yeah, it's a recurring theme, isn't it? With all of this is get senior people involved and dedicated resources that know the business well and are assigned the task of managing it.
I see. Just one last thing here. And I was going to say, typically over the years, IT might have driven such approaches, and really, you can argue that, but that would be, in my opinion, wrong. And it's really that major stakeholders that drive such business systems rather than it being an IT function, particularly when we move away from your typical on-premise cloud, etc. It should be more about business functionality rather than an IT function.
Apparently, the millennials are going to save us from this mire. So, being technically literate and digital natives, there'll be no problem like that in the future, Ross. Okay, good stuff. Let's press on. Hamish, and this is a challenge when you're sitting there trying to envision what the future of your business might be, but you don't know the capabilities of the product and what it can do, and should you be taking a product understanding into that business process mapping exercise? What's your view?
I guess I've always taken it as a perspective. You shouldn't be coming down a compromising what you want to achieve just because the product doesn't do it. You always go in with a perspective of how would we best like it to be. I mean, it's your chance. Like I say, it's like I give the bad analogy. Say it's Christmas, and you can make your wish list, and you make your compromises when you come to the solution design. Right? This is when you kind of say, well, okay, if we choose a solution, these are the things it won't do. I think, and as Rob mentioned earlier, we're seeing more and more people they're documenting how they want the processes to be with a bit of an oversight and a bit of a use case data to demonstrate in the products, and they're going to see, they'll see the compromises the products can do and the things that it can't do. But it's a very good exercise to go through how we would like the process to work. I don't think you want to compromise just because we know ABC system doesn't do it that way.
So it's valid exercise, keep the product out of it, but obviously be in a mind of being prepared to change as you go through the process and see opportunities, or maybe the wish list from Santa is or Santa's not going to deliver this year, maybe next year, kind of thinking.
I guess just to add to Hamish's comments, what we find, without getting too technical, it's the level of detail you get to in those 2B processes is key. If you stay at the right sort of those higher functional levels, then the product capability might drive the how you deliver those functions, but you still are clear on what those functions are that you need to fulfill.
So you think there's too much detail sometimes put into these early requirements documents and real nitty-gritty detail that just bogs the whole process down?
No, I think there's a risk of that. We tend to try and stay away from that as much as we can for the very reason that, Hamish is saying. You get too detailed, and you then then it becomes difficult to assess the product against that.
Yeah. Okay. Good comments.
Could I add just a bit more to that?
Sure.
I think this is getting back to the RFP side of it, because yes, you've got to avoid too much detail at that stage, but this is where it's key in that process to have direct communications with the business, not just the consultancy in between that's representing the RFP and trying to get to a shortlist, because so many of those RFPs are subjective, and having face-to-face meetings and discussing in more depth, because sometimes what processes they describe and what is known of what the solution you're putting forward, there might be another way around of doing it that just hasn't been thought of. And by listening to the business speak, it allows the experienced consultants to give perhaps another view. So just bringing that into the RFP process, we don't get that opportunity in a lot of cases to get to meet the customers and have discussions. We answer a checklist, and sometimes that checklist is horrendous and so subjective. It's very difficult. I understand why it has to be there and why you have to shorten down a list of people to put forward, but there needs to be more face-to-face interaction with the prospect.
I support that, Joanne. It's interesting. There's a perception usually when there are consultants involved that the vendors can't engage directly with the client, and yet those that do ask, I would never say no to, because I think for the very reason you said, it's important that there's a dialogue there to get better understanding. So I think it's imperative that there is a level of dialogue directly. Sure, the consultant might need to be there so they're across the conversation and the content that's going on and share it with other vendors, but I think that's critical in the process.
Yeah, but I'd probably just add to that, you see less and less this sort of sending out the requirements list, which are kind of these, like you say, they're very judgmental, and usually everyone says yes to them. Yes, we can do that. Yes, we can do that. And how do you, there's no conversation about the importance of that and the context of, what's going to drive the business.
All right, yeah, good dialogue, and I think plugs in very nicely to the next one. Ross, when do you know you should engage outside help?
Well, it's kind of interesting because everybody's sort of answered everything I was going to talk to in this point. It's kind of, I kind of agree with everything that really went before me. I mean, I guess in terms of starting answering it, obviously if a business is identified that they have an issue with current systems or business process, and don't know what the next steps are, maybe struggling to find a solution or information out there or a partner to work with, or indeed just seeking independent business advice, then going outside and getting consultancy input such as the guys is great for the business. I guess I would touch into Joanne and Rob's point before, that getting involved with a solution partner very early on in the process, I think, is a huge benefit in terms of specifically reviewing business requirements in line to the solution.
Ross, just make a comment. You're just fading in and a little bit out with audio, so maybe just lean into your mic a little bit.
Sorry about that.
What's going on there, but yeah, just struggling here.
Sorry about that. I'm really nice and close now. But I guess I was just touching on the point that trying to get, obviously, that process on the go externally can drive a lot of benefits, where it can sometimes hinder the process. And I think Rob's touched on it, and Joanne is that more typical RFP, and that can actually not provide the end result, whereas a view would be to try and get one or two or however many, a small number, I think, of solution providers involved early in the process, and more specific to talk about specific business process. And Rob mentioned that, we can all tick boxes that we do GL, but most of the leading respected platforms out there are going to do GL, AR, AP, all that kind of stuff, but it's the specifics. And it can really be the very small differences in business process. Even look and feel or ease of use, which we touched on before, that can sometimes be the determining factor. So getting actually in front of the solution early on and making comparisons, I think, is better than that typical fill out this documentation, which can be subjective, as Joanne mentioned. I think lastly, just on that point in terms of outside versus I guess such as ourselves, is relationship and cultural fit, etc., with who you end up engaging with, I think is equally important, if not as important, or more important in terms of the long-term decision and partnership. You're going to basically ask somebody to revolutionize your whole business, and therefore you need to have a good fit with whoever you want to work with, and therefore an early engagement in that process, I think, really drives results.
Lots of lessons, I think, there for the audience. If you're not listening, you should be, in terms of how you set up your initial engagement, be that with your internal teams or external. Please keep the questions going. We'll intersperse them as we go, and keen to have a bit of a cue there at the end. So if ideas are being percolated in your mind, please put them to print and open up the questions pane and get them into me. Okay. So next step, and we've touched on this a little bit in terms of framing up the project team and evaluation teams in early stage. But Rob, your perspective on the importance of getting your senior guys and girls in on the program earlier rather than later.
Yeah, I certainly think senior staff within the program are critical. I wouldn't say, though, I'm necessarily advocating a hands-on role. You know, I think the more important role for senior staff is to be that overarching driver, take out the roadblocks within the business to ensure the right people can get involved in the actual project team. To me, that's critical, that sponsorship at the senior level. But equally important, or more important, is to choose then the right project team within the organisation. Client of mine, I'll steal a quote or a description they use. They talk about, you know, how critical it is to have ERP IQ in the project team. Those people that understand how ERP works and those interdependencies we were talking about earlier. You know, I think that capability in your project team is critical.
Okay, just distracted slightly with a good question, but maybe we'll come back to that a little bit later on. Okay, so still governance, but I mean, I think for
me, senior staff, it's about governance and removing the obstacles or roadblocks. But the important thing is to choose the right people in your business. And we've touched on it in a number of different ways, you know, getting the right blend of people out of different operational roles, not just having finance drive it, not having just IT drive a project like this. It needs to be across the business. You know, I've always said the people you pick from the business should be your best people and you backfill them, not because often people see this as a distraction from the good people getting on with their work, so they'll put their B or C team on it. And the reality is you should have your A team on it.
Yeah, another recurring theme, that one, isn't it? It's a tough decision for a business to make, and probably most businesses would underestimate the real disruption that they need to go through to make these projects a success.
Yep, but I guess that's the role of the consultant, to help them understand that and the value that they'll get if they do make that investment in a short period of time while they're going through selecting and implementing.
Yeah. Okay, good stuff. Any other comments on that one from the team?
I strongly support what Rob has said there. The senior staff do need to do the governing, take out the roadblocks. There's a lot of people in the background that sometimes get forgotten, yet some of their roles are key in the processes that they do. So this then brings it down to identifying the process mapping and that's going on in the business. That's key. They mustn't be forgotten. There needs to be a look across the whole business and identify those process flows and who's contributing to them. And then the senior people can make decisions around whether those processes should change, or some of them have come in late in the part and late into the business and don't even know maybe some of them are in existence. So you've actually got to turn your business upside down a little bit and have a good look around.
Yep.
It's interesting. I was going to say that maybe we should have reversed the question and how important, maybe not junior, but your real coalface operational people who probably think, you know, this whole IT project's a bit of hoopla and a load of BS, but actually they don't realise how much value they can bring into those roles.
Yep.
Okay. We've probably already covered this, to be fair, but just talking about what stage vendors should be engaged and involved in the discussion. You know, there's always a bit of chicken and egg here, but Joe, you lead off with any points
I would agree. I think I've already blurted it out in the early stages, but let me look at it as a slightly different way of doing it, is the engagement as early as possible. But it doesn't stop a business doing their own due diligence first. let them get in there, let them research the software that is around themselves, let them look at the R&D investment that's been put in by the vendor, look how long the implementation solution partner has been delivering. Are they a gold partner? Are they certified? Are they financially stable? Who are their customers? All of that can be done and looked at to reduce the RFP impact that's going out initially to a smaller document, to a smaller list of people. And then, of course, once that RFP, as I've expressed before, get the face-to-face happening at that stage. And I support that Rob's approach to that now. It is absolutely key. You've got a long-term relationship, which Ross touched on. We don't enter into just doing a pre-sales, do the sale and out of it. We're looking for a long-term relationship, and it's got to work for us as much as it's got to work for the customers. So meeting them and then meeting the consultants up front. Our pre-sales people are the people that are going to be delivering the project, and they are going to be the people that are going to be around for the long-term support. So that contact is critical.
Okay, maybe now, Tim, your question from the audience, and this is when I guess you get exposed to the pricing and some indicative kind of idea of what this whole thing's going to cost you, and you're faced with the prospect of one solution being 3 to 4 times more expensive than the next. How do you go about evaluating whether it's worth paying that amount more? You know, maybe they've got a much more of a future focus. Maybe they've got a much more mature solution. You know, is there an exercise that you go through specifically to weigh that up, or is it just a gut feel you come out the end of it with?
I'm happy to jump in on that one. Yep. Firstly, one of the steps that we try and enforce, and most of the time we're able to with the client, is that when we get responses back, RFP responses, we don't share price with the client while they're going through the evaluation. So they are purely assessing functionality without seeing price. And that helps, because then you can have a more objective conversation about price when they realise the product that, you know, all of them loved is twice the price. And you can have a conversation around why. The other point I'd make about 3 to 4 times as expensive, that's where the business case becomes so critical, and what business benefit you're trying to drive and where the value is.
Yeah, okay. I'd probably add to that and just sort of say you often see people going in with the cost equation for the project, but the reality is, you know, where's the benefits coming? What are we getting out of this investment? Which all drives back to your business case. So if you want to be presenting the full picture, so you're going to get benefit out of this investment.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Good. Thanks, Tim. We will press on. We're getting through the time, so doing well, guys. Hamish, another point that comes up regularly is the importance of the local support, either directly from the vendor or the strength of the implementation partner. What are your perspectives on, you know, how risky is it to go with the US-based vendor that's got the fantastic product, but maybe not so many feet on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I operate in the New Zealand market, which is a lot smaller and less options. Yeah. People are a lot more comfortable with someone they can go up the road to and talk to. The reality of that role, you find it's really critical having sort of interactions and communications fairly on the implementation and the design. But as that relationship goes, the need for that local support gets less and less as they get more attuned to the product. I suppose it's definitely an advantage, but I don't think it's a necessity. There are ways of working around it. Be interested in other people's perspective on that.
I think I could probably guess what Joanne and Ross's perspective on that is, Hamish. But so maybe they can present their positions.
Yeah.
Go for it, Joanne.
Face to face, local, can't be beaten.
Yeah.
And well, I suppose New Zealand is a lot smaller. It's only a hour and a half away to any destination if we have to be on site. Yes, we do a lot of remote support, but the ability to be there, to be face to face and work through it, or do that extra bit of training, that's key.
Yeah, I'm finding though a lot of those international cloud-based vendors have realised that and are starting to develop business partner models and having people local on the ground anyway. I think it's important, and I think the vendors that are, the bigger, more successful vendors are doing that through a business partner model.
But they haven't got that relationship with the end user, the customer. They haven't got that. It could be one person one week and another person the next week. They haven't got that person that they establish a relationship with, that they can go back time after time and work through an issue that may start in one area, lead to another, and then there's no proactivity going on to help them ongoing development of their business and improvements that can be made. It's just purely reactive on, I've got a support issue, it doesn't work, help me.
That's why I'm supporting what you're saying, Joanne, that I think that most of those vendors, the bigger vendors, have put local business partners in place to fill that function.
But still reactive to fill that as reactive to just a support problem, or a proactive approach to meet with them and discuss their needs going forward?
Well, that'll depend on whether they, typically yes, because they've been involved in implementation as well.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, look, there's a lot of issues that come into play, and it's a real balance. I think striking this one is do you limit yourself with a lack of local support when you've got a fantastic solution, particularly when you get into these industry vertical solutions? It starts to get expensive. You fly people around and you put the investment in to form the relationship, but then managing remotely this day and age with a whole bunch of tools that come into play that make that a lot easier than it used to be anyway. Yep. Okay, and maybe this is the $1 million question. We've got 13 questions, but when I go to the next slide, you'll see it's missing. So there's a mystery question that's going to come in at the end that is going to answer all of your questions, and it'll be related to this one. Ross, how and when should you set a budget?
Well, thanks, Hayden, for that question. I mean, we've kind of touched on some elements in some previous conversations there. I mean, obviously you need to have a high level thought of investment levels, but really, can you really get to that budgeting level until you've got that detailed set of business requirements, or potentially engaged with, a consultant or a solution provider to really get to the level of detail to be able to provide, budgeting estimates around software transition, implementation services. I guess that's typically what, Rob, Hamish and his team, or Joanne and our team would do in terms of, workshopping to try and provide that level of feedback. I mean, I guess that budget figure is subjective. A lot of the time we find that it's the nice to haves that are ending up that end up blowing out a cost. So you really got to just work through with what is a really key business process versus what's nice to have, or even into a budget from a phased approach. We chatted on it earlier about that quick win platform versus long-term view of rolling out more advanced function or functionality over a period of time. So a phased approach can really help with that overall, I guess, context of initial budget versus investment. Even through implementation, potentially extend that through learning more about the product, and as long as there is control around it, potentially investing more than maybe you realised up front. So it's very difficult, but I think Hamish touched on it. Cost benefit and return on investments are key drivers. Budget, having a figure is important, but it's more about what am I investing and what benefit I'm getting, and that's really what we try and bring to the table in our pre-sales model to try and show a level of budget cost and what will the benefit be back in terms of moving forward with that investment.
Okay, wider panel. Rob, you've probably got a perspective on this one.
Yeah, it's always a difficult one. It's usually one of my first questions, though, when I go into a prospective client looking to, get us involved, to see what sort of expectation they have of how much they're going to be spending. It's often difficult if they're not a client of our firm that we know well to be able to help them set a budget. You've got to get down into a fair amount of detail to understand some of the complexities of the business and the functionality then they may be looking at with the various products that you're going to consider. So, but I would suggest we certainly want to talk about budget as early as possible and start to set an expectation that these exercises are not, typically they're under budgeted, not over budgeted. And so try and set that expectation that it'll be more than you probably expect. And then use the procurement process to really develop a realistic view of the costs. And I know that's hard if you're the business partner on the other side, because you're trying to win the deal, and so you're trying to be as competitive as you can. So yeah, it is a balancing act in my mind.
Hamish, you got a perspective on that?
Yeah, I'd say they're always under budgeted, and there's always factors of uncertainty that, always ironic. You go into, and just with an organisation this morning actually, they're talking about, we're going to be over budget, and it's sort of like, well, how much information did you have when you said it? How informed were you? It didn't come down on a tablet from Moses, so it was your best guess at the time on the information. The other thing you always see undercooked in budgets is change management. They actually get the product embedded and adopted and sort of driving some of the benefits away out of it. So, I guess to answer the question, when should you set the budget? Set it early on, but have maturity to say it's indicative and these are the assumptions I've made behind it.
Yeah. It is a very hard piece of information to get your hands on to understand what people have spent. We do a whole bunch of case studies, and very seldom is that number revealed in terms of what the total business cost was. You might be able to get to a software cost, but what proportion is the software cost of the total implementation? It's
usually the smallest cost.
Well, that's exactly it. And in big complex environments, it gets smaller and smaller, right?
Yep.
So yeah, it is a tricky one. Okay, we've got the magic question 13. A couple of questions have come in. Thank you very much, and we'll have enough time to set those. But if you've got any others that have popped into your mind, audience, please get them in, because we're going to run out of time with these guys, and you've got some very good brains on call. So use them while you've got them. Sorry, I won't go to that. But Rob, I know I sent out 13 questions and I've only put 12 in the presentation. The 13th was all about the business case, which obviously is a significant gap and an important process for a lot of companies that they should go through, but don't necessarily go through in a thorough way. So maybe just talk about the value of the business case, why you should go through it, and what it should achieve for you.
Yeah, sure. I think, yes, it is an important piece of the process. We've touched on it in a number of the other questions. I guess in its purest sense, it's there to, assist senior management, a board, to make a decision around the investment. But as I think we said earlier, I think it's not only about the costs, it's about the benefits, and ensuring that you understand where the opportunity of savings or increase of revenue are going to be across the business, that you can offset against that. So I think it's a powerful document to get people in the business really thinking about why they're embarking on ERP and what the real benefits to their business will be. And some people sort of we'll go to and they'll say, oh, we've had a business case approved to go and select a new ERP. My view is they've set a budget but they can't have done a business case until they know the solution that they're choosing and they understand the benefits that that solution will realise. So I'd sort of suggest that the business case comes at the end of the procurement process, not at the front.
Which is absolutely not what people do, is it?
Correct. Often they'll say to me, "Oh, we've had a business case approved." What I think they've had is the budget approved.
Yeah. Comments, wider team?
Yeah, I suppose that it's sort of say often you can see public sector two-stage runs. They do an indicative and then the real and the second stage. And the second stage would be, as Rob suggests, is you only really know once you've gone through the procurement, you understand what you're actually going to do. You can indicative is this is kind of high level what the problem we want to solve, and this is the money we'll throw it at for now. We think we're going to put it at. Yep.
Yeah, look, I think from and probably limited experience into sort of doing full comprehensive business cases, but it's not necessarily the document that you're producing, which a lot of people look at the document and say, this is what I produced, hand it over and expect someone to ingest it. It's actually, the value is in the production of the document, the thinking that you do while you produce that document. So the person that's produced it has to be integral to the they've thought about a lot of the things that are of value, and they're looking to get value out of the project. They're taking that into the project and drawing on it all the way through. I guess similar with the requirements documents, about consistency of key people that you've got involved, having them drive the project right through the completion.
I'd add, Hayden, that post select and implement, to go back to those benefits that you identified and make sure you are realising them becomes really important, because often that reflection really helps you focus back on what those benefits were, and you, I guess, you make sure that you have achieved them, and if not, why not? And how do you go about getting to that point?
All right, good stuff. Now, a question in from Andrew, and using the term postmodern ERP, and I guess that movement is that you've got a core ERP capability that's your system of record, if you like, but then you've got these specialised cloud-based applications that are much more user-friendly. So it's a hybrid, I suppose, of some of the things that we've talked about earlier on in the session. What's the view from the panel in terms of the way organisations should go about procuring when they've got multiple solutions and different vendors, and actually that's the right thing for that organisation to do and build integration between them? What's the perspective? Joanne, do you want to lead that one off?
Postmodern ERP. Okay, yes, there's more and more we're seeing of hybrids, and the integration is a challenging area, but there are tools that will manage that, and it has to be some good business processes need to be put in place and how they want to analyse it. I'm looking at an ERP that has a total solution with minimal integrations. So yeah, I'll pass to one of my colleagues to answer a bit more on that.
I think Joanne is touching on that because we're in the same boat.
Yeah.
Because you are trying to provide this one-stop business management platform or ERP. But there is, there is still potential point systems in terms of the cloud environment that maybe do. They are so specialised. Rob touched about e-commerce. It's very, very custom front end in terms of an e-commerce platform and what it does. So that sometimes becomes a key point in terms of integration, or if anybody's done email marketing, something like a MailChimp is such a strong play in the market that really your ERP will go so far, but there is still systems that can potentially enhance the solution. I guess it really comes back to the driver around what you're trying to achieve, and does the core platform do it to a level without having to invest, not so much from just the other solution, but the potential integration layer that might sit behind it as well. So there is point systems out there, I think, that will always exist as potential into even an ERP, but you really have to work out what's the cost benefit, I guess, of deploying that.
I'd go so far as saying that we are seeing more and more multi sort of system procurements where you might have a core ERP, but there are other components that are needed to meet the business need. So I think it's just the nature of the maturity of the market. It does make it a bit more complex to procure, but more and more, especially say around services businesses where I don't think the ERP market is as mature. If I've got I need labour management as a really key component, as well as my core ERP. You're going to need to look at multiple systems to achieve that.
All right, look, that's probably gone slightly over time. Great discussion. Thank you, panelists, for your contribution. I'll just add a couple of things, and there's a sponsor to thank. But we, in the lead-in to today's event, we have written a couple of articles on iStart. With interviewing Ross and Joanne together, and then Hamish and Rob. There's some really good material and a lot of the points that they touched on, and probably elaborate a bit further in those articles. So we'll send links out to those with the follow-up comes about this time tomorrow, and that will also have the link to the video, so you can share that with all and sundry if you've got a wider team that are engaged. So thank you very much, panelists, and thanks to the audience. I have got a few questions. Just when you go out of the session today, you get popped up with a little survey, feedback exit survey. Please fill that in. Take the time to let us know how you thought we did today. There's just some insights there in terms of how well we matched with what we delivered, and also any ideas you've got for future events would be great. Thank you very much. And thanking today's sponsor, SAP. We've deliberately kept SAP, and I've just realised, Ellie, who's on the call, I haven't changed that logo out. It should have been the SAP Business One logo. But SAP have generously supported this event. They're obviously keen to see a close match between businesses who are looking for software being matched with the right software providers. So have supported us in bringing that to you today. And we didn't want to skew any perceptions of this being an SAP session, which it most definitely wasn't. So thanks to them. Contact details on the screen. Now, Joanne and Ross represent SAP Business One as local partners in Melbourne and in Auckland. They'll be in touch with you to just say hi, but also an opportunity for you to ask them any questions or follow up with anything they've brought up today with your specific needs. And I know there's a few that registered that do have specific needs, so we'll come back directly on those. So yeah, thanks again, panelists, for your time and contribution. It's been great dealing with you and the preparation, and also with your delivery today. So well done, and thanks very much. I think it's a lot of value there to the audience, and an interesting session for me too. So without further ado, I'll bring that to a close. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.